Have you ever heard the phrase "save the bees"? You probably have, especially because in recent years, the Save the Bees movement has been gaining a massive amount of traction. Advertising campaigns from brands like Honey Nut Cheerios and Burts Bees, as well as support from celebrities such as Angelina Jolie, have led to increased awareness of the threat to bees. These Bring Back the Bee campaigns all tend to have one thing in common. They use honeybees as the poster child for bee conservation. Today, I want to redefine your concept of a bee, and hopefully inspire you to save not just honeybees, but native pollinators as well. Hi, my name is Liv, and I'm a beekeeper/environmental science student. For the last 2 years, when I haven't been in school studying environmental science, I've been working at the Beaver Lodge Research Farm in Beaver Lodge, Alberta, as a research beekeeper. Every time I tell people what I do for work, they always respond with some version of, "That's great, save the bees." And while it is true that pollinators are super important to ecosystem health, something I've learned at school is that not all pollinators are the same. Today, I've decided to dive a little bit deeper into something I've spent a lot of time thinking about. Is there a difference between managed pollinators and native pollinators? You've probably heard the word pollinator before, or pollination, but what does that actually mean? Pollination is defined as the act of transferring pollen grains from the male anther of a flower to a female stigma. Essentially, pollination is the process by which plants are able to reproduce. Pollen grains move from the male reproductive structure, the anther, to the female reproductive structure, the stigma. These pollen grains then travel down into the ovary to fertilize the ovule, or egg. Some plants are self-fertilizing, meaning they're able to reproduce on their own. But most plants are cross-pollinating, and they need something to bring their pollen from one plant to another. This is where pollinators come in. While some plants rely on things like wind and water to move their pollen, many need the help of pollinators. Pollinators come in many shapes and sizes, from bugs to birds to bats. Typically, pollinators are in search of something like nectar, so they go from flower to flower trying to find it. They'll land on one flower, and pollen from that flower will attach itself to them. Then they'll go to another, looking for more nectar, and the pollen that was attached to them will fertilize the new flower. Now that we know a little bit about what pollinators are and what they do, let's talk about what the difference is between managed pollinators and native pollinators. As we established in the intro, when people think of bees, they tend to picture honeybees and beekeepers, which makes sense. Most people's interactions with honeybees tend to be things like purchasing honey at the grocery store. So is there a difference between the fuzzy bumblebees we see flying around a meadow and the ones that produce our honey? The short answer is yes. There are a few differences between these bees, but the main one is where they come from. The most common bee managed to cultivate honey goes by a few names: the Western honeybee, the European honeybee, or its scientific name, Apis mellifera. The native range of Apis mellifera encompasses Africa, the Middle East, and Europe. As far as I can tell, there's 2 reasons why Apis mellifera is chosen for commercial honey production. The first is that they produce an insane amount of honey, but the second is they have a proclivity for cavity nesting. Cavity nesting means that these bees like to live in things like holes in trees, or, importantly, boxes. This makes them a really easy bee to manage because as long as beekeepers maintain acceptable conditions, they can actually put out boxes for the bees to live in. These are called brood boxes, and they typically consist of an outer shell with 9 to 10 frames inside. These frames allow beekeepers to actually remove sections of the colony for easy management and inspection. During the flow season, honeybees begin producing an insane amount of honey to store for winter. During this season, beekeepers will add an additional box called a honey super, as well as a barrier called a queen excluder. This allows beekeepers to remove honey from the colony without disrupting things like brood or eggs laid by the queen. Not only do honeybees produce honey for us to eat, but they're also extremely important to our agriculture sector. In 2021, Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada estimated that the total economic contribution of honeybee pollination to produce was around $808 million. Now that we know a little bit more about managed pollinators, let's talk about native pollinators. As I mentioned before, the bees used in honey production are not native to North America. Native pollinators, however, are. There are many different species of native bees, and they vary by region. In Alberta, for example, where I'm from, there's estimated to be over 380 species of native bees. These bees come in all sorts of colors and sizes, and many of them don't even exhibit the social behavior we typically associate with bees. I think many of us have a very structured idea of what a bee is, but native bees are kind of all over the place. Many bees don't fit into our typical idea of what a bee is, which means they're often forgotten in Save the Bee movements. But native bees are extremely important pollinators, and many are at risk due to things like habitat loss. Honeybees are really important to things like our agriculture sector, so I don't deny that they're important. But I think that we should spend a little bit more time thinking about our native pollinators when it comes to bee conservation. Which brings us to our final question. How can you help pollinators? Because a huge risk to pollinators is habitat loss, you can really easily help them by supporting their habitat. This can be done by planting native plants in your backyard or your garden. Bees thrive on diversity, so choose a few different species to plant in your garden. Other things you can do that are really easy are things like delaying raking your yard. The leaf litter can help provide protection for pollinators from things like late season frost. There are lots of great online resources for ways you can help bees in your area. For example, here in Alberta, we have the Alberta Native Bee Council website, and they have plenty of great resources for what kind of plants you should put in your garden and other ways that you can help pollinators. I suggest doing a simple Google search with your state or province followed by native bee to find some online resources of how you can help. Today we talked about what pollination is and how pollinators help flowers reproduce. Then we looked at what honeybees are, where they come from, and how beekeepers manage them. Then we got into what native bees are and how they're different from honeybees. Finally, we talked about what you can do to save the bees. Thank you for taking the time to learn with me, and I hope to see you again soon. Bye!